it was so hard, like, as I was preparing for the interview, it was so hard to kind of narrow down, like, what to ask you about, because you've played on so many amazing songs. But starting off with Toto, I wanted to ask you about a song off the album Hydra, which was 99. And that was a song, I got to see Toto a couple years ago, and hearing it live really kind of it changed the song for me and made me kind of appreciate it more, because it's so atmospheric and really driven by the keyboard playing on the song. So what was it like to put that track together?
I remember that very well, because that was the second album. That was the Hydra album, and I had just gotten this huge modular system. It was kind of crazy, but I all of a sudden found myself having this huge modular system, and 99 in particular, the solo on 99 was something that I wanted to use the modular system for. And my friend, Roger Lynn, of Lynn Drum Machine's fame, was helping me, taught me a lot, was teaching me about synthesis and teaching me a lot of the basics. And he was actually in the studio when we were doing that session for the solo, and he helped me with he helped me getting the lead sound on the modular synthesizer, and just watching him do some of the most. And it was a pretty basic sound, but watching the way he did it, watching how he on the Polyfusion, nothing was preset, nothing was patched behind the scenes. You had to patch everything. So it made it look very complicated, but yet at the same time, it was a great learning. It was a great way to learn, because you saw everything. You could see the control path as well as the signal path, the audio path of everything. It was like kind of right there to follow. It was a really cool way to learn. And also, yeah, thanks for using that word. I've always atmosphere has always been a huge thing for me, a huge thing about my songs and about my music and the kind of sounds I like to do. I love to feel like you're somewhere when you're working on a
Yeah, for sure. And it's also, kind of cool hearing that story, because, like, that album came out in 79, so it's like right before, those like synthesizers start to get easier to use. It's still of that era where it was like, you really had to know what you were doing to use that stuff.
Pre-MIDI,
Yeah.
And yes, and I'd learned things like a Mini Moog and the CS80. I had gotten the CS80 for the first album, and that's another thing, is that there were so few synthesizers then, other than the kind of the modular stuff, which was really kind of going off the deep end. There were so few synthesizers. The few that I had, the Mini Moog and like the CS80, I mastered them. I knew them inside and out. And that's why that led to me programming for guys. Guys loved having me around, to where, I was just telling someone today, I mean, David Paich did a bunch of stuff when he was just him and my brother Jeff were doing their very first demos. David could get great sounds on a Mini Moog. He could get great bass sounds. A lot of these guys, they could easily stumble into getting a very cool sound. They all had great ears, but it was when you're doing sessions and the clock is ticking and it's $350 an hour, and there's a producer there and there's an engineer there and there's the artist sitting there. They liked having me around, because while maybe they were able to fall into something, luck into something sometime, they liked having me around. I was kind of like a security blanket for a lot of these guys, I think, in a way.
For sure, yeah.
The pressure was on and they had to deliver, and why isn't this synth staying in tune or whatever? I kind of was the synth whisperer for guys like David Paich and David Foster.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on, of course, this record here, Toto IV, was the breakthrough album for you guys. And I wanted to ask you about the song "Waiting for Your Love" because that's an interesting. I think it's got a great keyboard solo in the middle of it with a lot of like fast parts. So, what was it like putting that track together?
Yeah, no, that's a very unusual track, and I was real proud of that. For the most part, on Toto IV, what was great, what was the big change from in the previous albums was that was when David Paich, we had gotten he had two 24-track tape machines in our home studio, which was really kind of unheard of. You know, we were truly able to take our time and do whatever we wanted to do. And we didn't have the clock ticking like it usually was, or the whole band behind us with their arms folded waiting for us to deliver something as fast as they delivered parts. I could really take my time. I could really experiment. I had learned just the most basic kind of engineering, just gain structure, how to get a good level on tape. So on songs like Rosanna and Africa, I was able to do all kinds of experimenting, and it really paid off. A lot of the stuff you hear on the album synthwise was because I had that much time that you usually didn't in the studio. But Waiting for Your Love is the exception. That song, I remember we were actually did those solos at Record One. We did them in a different studio. And I remember I mostly used the Prophet 5, I believe, for the solo on Waiting for Your Love. And it was both David and I. And I had written out my solo. I had written it out. I just would kind of sing in my head what I wished I could improvise, but it was more of a composed thing. But then the second half was David Paich, and he, of course, was just blowing. That was just coming off the top of his head in real time.
Yeah.
So it was very cool, and I remember it, and I loved it. And what a great song of Bobby's, you know.
For sure, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the studio setup that you guys had, because I remember David telling me about that when I interviewed him, how it was like the home studio setup for that album. Is that kind of similarly on the Rosanna keyboard solo? Was that kind of a similar setup where it was you and David trading licks, or just
yes,
one guy?
very much, but it was just us. None of the guys were around, and we had really taken our time. I had kind of was taking my time putting together again, writing out that initial phrase, you know, that initial triumphant figure that the synthesizers play at the beginning of the solo. But then David was very much a huge part of it with me, and we kind of went around the room. We were like, let's do something with the Mini Moog now, and then we did a very typical Rick Wakeman. You know, we would just kind of we pieced it together. The morning before, late in the middle of the night until dawn, we worked on that solo until they mixed it that day. So we kind of just came in under the wire and put together, you know, this solo with kind of no rules, you know.
Yeah, yeah.